Well, hello, everybody. A particular welcome to everybody from Lewis U3A, and also a warm welcome to everybody from Helensburgh U3A. In case anybody is disappointed by my accent, I can confirm that we are based in Lewis, East Sussex, and not Lewis, Isle of Lewis, Outer Hebrides. This is the time of the year when we use spectacular lighting effects to make the darkness more bearable. For example, we think of November the 5th, Christmas, or Hogmanay. We're all familiar with fireworks, candles, and sophisticated illuminations. However, until this evening, most of us, except perhaps our most avid theatre and opera goers, will perhaps not have given much thought as to who is responsible for providing the specialist lighting these events, and also for television and cinema. So we are very fortunate this evening in having someone who will tell us not only some of the secrets of his craft, but how specialist stage lighting designers are trained, and how the technology has developed, and also some of the highlights so far of his career. Please welcome Mr. David Cunningham.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
So I'll share the screen and start the slideshow. Right. Good evening, everyone. So this talk will be in two parts. Firstly, I will talk about my career and various technical aspects of my work for those of you who are interested. I ask those of you who are not interested to try to stay awake for the second half, when I will concentrate on photographs of operas and plays which I have lit. In 1970, I went to the University of Stirling to study English literature. In September 1970, the only building was Pathfoot, the building on the left as you go into the campus, in the foreground of this picture. The rest of the university was under construction. In Freshers' Week, I went to the inaugural meeting of the University Dramatic Society. There were 12 people at that meeting. 11 of them wanted to act. I was the only one who didn't want to act. I came out of the meeting having chosen the first play and agreed to direct it. The play I chose was Zoo Zoo Widdershins Zoo by Kevin Laffan. I chose it because I liked the title. We didn't have a theatre to perform in, so we pushed tables together in Pathfoot Coffee Lounge to form a stage and did one performance. In those days, I didn't much care about lighting. If you could see the actors, that was enough. In September 1971, the McRobert Theatre opened on the campus. I went in there to ask for work as a casual, and on the first day, I was assigned to the lighting department. In those days, Scottish Opera didn't have a home theatre, so they used the McRobert Theatre for a week of rehearsals with one performance on the Saturday, and then they took that opera on tour. The first opera was The Rake's Progress by Stravinsky, directed by David Pountney. He subsequently became very influential in my career. At the time, I didn't much like The Rake's Progress. However, the next opera was The Marriage of Figaro, and I thought, I like this. I carried on with my studies, having changed to philosophy, and worked in the McRobert for the lighting department for Scottish Opera and other visiting companies, one of which was the Prospect Theatre Company, with whom I worked on Richard III, with Richard Bryars as Richard III. It's a comedy. Who knew? One night in my third year, I was standing at the bar in the foyer of the McRobert Theatre chatting to Charlie Bristow, one of Scottish Opera's lighting designers. And he said, Why don't you give up this philosophy nonsense and come and join the opera? I said no, I would finish my degree first, but afterwards, yes, I would. Decision made. When I did graduate, I was contacted by Guy Amidro, who had been chief electrician of the Macrobot Theatre, but had left to go to Wyndham's Theatre in Charing Cross Road in London. He offered me a job as lighting board operator, and this is the board I learned to operate on. It's electromechanical, no electronics at all, and built, as you can see, into an organ console. So I went to London. I arrived for the last 4 months of the original run of Godspell with David Essex and Jeremy Irons in the cast. Then 4 months of a play called The Dame of Sark with Celia Johnson. Then 4 months of The Tempest with Paul Schofield as Prospero. At the end of that year in London, Guy Amidro left to go to the King's Theatre in Edinburgh. I didn't want to stay on in London. I loved London theatre, but hated living in London, still do. So I phoned Scottish Opera. Can I have a job, please? Yes, when can you start? 2 weeks. Okay. I then did 4 years as Deputy Chief Electrician at Scottish Opera, up to 1979. During those 4 years, Scottish Opera moved into the Theatre Royal in Glasgow and made it their home, and I met my wife there. Those were the glory days at Scottish Opera. In those days, they did 12 operas in a season. Now they do 4. I then applied for 2 jobs as Chief Electrician at Welsh National Opera in Cardiff and Opera North in Leeds. These are the only 2 interviews I've ever had in my life. I didn't get the Welsh job, but I did get the Opera North job. I was Chief Electrician there from 1979 until 1985. I want to be clear about the roles of Chief Electrician and Lighting Designer. The lighting designer's job is to come up with the ideas for the lighting of the show. The Chief Electrician's job is to execute them. In 1983, I was asked by Stefan Lazaridis, the set designer, to be lighting designer for a production of an opera version of Rebecca, the Daphne du Maurier story filmed by Hitchcock. I did that successfully and was subsequently asked to light other operas for Opera North. Then, in 1985, Stefan Lazaridis asked me to light a play at the Almeida Theatre in Islington in London, which was to be directed by a Russian director, Yuri Lubimov. The play was a staging of The Possessed by Dostoevsky. I got on like a house on fire with Yuri, though he spoke no English and I spoke no Russian. At the party after the premiere, he asked me, via an interpreter, to light 4 more shows, 2 plays and 2 operas in the following year, in Vienna, Bologna, Karlsruhe, and Paris. So I left Opera North to go freelance, and the rest is history. From then on, I was a freelance lighting designer. The pattern of my work would involve lighting around 12 shows every year, 1 a month, roughly 8 operas and 4 plays, though it was never as regular as that. It involved a great deal of traveling, but I always say it's not the traveling I hate, it's the luggage. That's a resume of my career. Now on to the technical stuff. Let's start with what I don't do. I don't push buttons and I don't climb ladders. Theatre technicians do that. I don't light for film or TV. I don't light rock and roll. I have lit a few musicals and 1 ballet. Ballet just isn't my thing. I don't do video. If there is a video element in the set, it's the set designer's responsibility, not mine. I do light operas and plays. Plays. I like plays in the UK, Ireland, and in the US. I have lit a couple of plays in other languages, but by far the majority are in English. Professional performances of plays are performed in different contexts. there are the national companies. So the Royal National Theatre and the Scottish National Theatre, and also the Royal Shakespeare Company is really in a category on its own. This is The Taming of the Shrew, directed by Jonathan Miller and designed by Stefan Lazaridis. And you can see there that the performers are Brian Cox and Fiona Shaw. This was in 1987, so both looking much younger than they do now. There are regional repertory theatres, such as Chichester Festival Theatre and the Citizens in Glasgow and the Lyceum in Edinburgh. The picture on the right is a review of the Othello I lit with Will Johnson and Liam Brennan. An aside here, I went along to the rehearsal room run-through of Othello in Edinburgh. In addition to the cast, the only people watching were the director, who was Mark Thompson, the stage manager, and me. Liam Brennan, as Iago, chose to deliver all Iago's soliloquies straight into my face, nose to nose. Terrifying. Where was I? There are commercial touring companies touring plays to theatres like the Theatre Royal in Glasgow, or the King's Theatre in Glasgow, or the Theatre Royal in Brighton, or the Congress Theatre in Eastbourne. There are smaller scale fringe companies like the Tron, or the Tron in Glasgow, or the Traverse in Edinburgh. There are commercial plays performed in one of the 41 West End theatres in London, or 39 on Broadway. Then there are festival performances, of which the biggest is the Edinburgh Fringe. All of these plays need lighting. Let's look at the equipment. The main types are Fresnels, named for Augustin Jean Fresnel, inventor of the stepped lens. Then there are profiles and pars. The par looks innocuous, but used in large numbers, they're often used for rock concert lighting, as here. I didn't light this. I was not the lighting designer. This is just to show you how pars can be used. This is Kanye West's lighting rig with 415 pars. This is a moving head, moving light or mover. It can be remotely controlled for direction, color, size, sharpness, and intensity. These lights, which were invented in the early 1980s, have transformed theatre lighting. Moving lights have changed the public's expectation of lighting. If you've noticed the lighting of shows like Strictly Come Dancing, or even The Chase, or Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you will see the lights waving around and making continuous patterns in the air. So I'm going to break out now and show you a video. Just a couple of things here. First of all, you wouldn't see any of those beams of light if the studio wasn't filled with haze. The cameras don't notice it, but you would be aware of it if you were in the audience. Secondly, the movers can do snap changes of color like that because they have 3 color LED sources. If you want to discuss that with me, set aside an hour sometime. But that kind of lighting is appropriate for Strictly. It's no use for Hamlet or Waiting for Godot. Each theatre will own a selection of lights. In a proscenium theatre, the front of house lights will be in fixed positions, but for the onstage lights, I'm free to arrange the lights as I choose. I'm employed by the management to prepare the lighting by drawing a plan in advance. Please don't try to read this, the detail is far too small. Then attending a run-through rehearsal in the rehearsal room. The next stage is the fit-up. This is a typical schedule for a simple play in a repertory theatre. The fit-up or build will happen only 4 or 5 days before the first performance, often on a Sunday. The lighting equipment is rigged first, then the set, which has been built in workshops, is constructed according to the designer's instructions. I then focus the lights with the technicians, directing them on the acting area or on parts of the set, through windows, through doors, anywhere I can. The next part of the process is plotting, often on a Monday evening. I sit in the middle of the auditorium with the director, the designer, the stage manager, and the programmer, and we go through the play, painting the stage with light, concentrating the audience's attention on the performers. Another important element is the atmosphere in which the writer intended. Many plays have a night scene, or in opera, for example, in La Bohème, Act 1 is set in the 1900s in a Paris attic at night with candles and moonlight written into the text. Shakespeare gives me simple stage directions like a blasted heath in King Lear. Of course, Shakespeare didn't write the stage directions himself, but that's another subject. Then on Tuesday, the cast come in and the technical rehearsal begins. The director will take the cast slowly through the play, timing entrances and exits and stage business in the lighting states that we have prepared. There's a fallacy about actors finding their light. They don't. I find them. The technical rehearsal will normally last all day on Tuesday and Wednesday, then a dress rehearsal on Thursday afternoon, and the first performance on Thursday evening. My job is done. I won't normally attend any more performances after the premiere. That's the pattern of a fairly simple play. Plays performed in the West End of London or on Broadway differ in that the first public performance will be a reduced price preview, and there will be lots of previews, up to 20, before the press night. During these previews, I will be making refinements to the lighting to make it perfect before the press see it. This is because in the West End and on Broadway, a play will be performed until the audience numbers drop below a profitable margin, and a lot depends on the press reviews. A bad review in the New York Times or the Evening Standard, and your play won't last a week. The pattern can also be altered by the complexity of the play. I lit a play in Liverpool called The Ragged-Trousered Philanthropists. The cast of 7 men play a team of house painters. They arrive in a drab hallway at the beginning, and in the course of the play, they paint it, turning it into a beautifully decorated room. The cast must do it themselves, so the technical rehearsal involves keeping track of colours, cleaning brushes, and making the right progress through the painting, while delivering the text and singing Victorian work songs, such as When Father Painted the Parlour. The technical rehearsal began at 9 a.m. on Tuesday and ended at 11 p.m. on Thursday, but it was great. Now, let's turn to opera. Lighting opera follows a similar pattern, but spread out over 3 weeks. The biggest difference is scale. let's look at Bregenz. Bregenz is a small town in Austria at the southern end of the lake that we call Lake Constance and the Germans call the Bodensee. It's where Austria, Germany, and Switzerland meet. They have held an opera festival there every year since 1946, and this is the scale of it today. On the right is the so-called floating stage. It's not really floating. There is a concrete platform under all that. This shows the set for Turandot. There are 6,700 seats. They do around 28 performances in July and August, and then the set remains over the winter for another 28 performances in the second year, and then they begin to change to another opera for a further 2 years. That's a total of 375,000 spectators for each opera over the 2 years. I'll return to the subject of Bregenz later. At the other end of the scale, we have this performance of The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart for the Grimebourne Festival in Hackney in London. The set is only 3 meters by 3 meters in the round. I have lit operas in 26 countries. Don't try to read the text here, it's too small. In this image, you can see all the theatres where I have either lit plays or operas. Opera is much more popular in Europe than here in the UK. Germany, for example, has 83 full-time opera companies. The UK has 5. One of the big differences between operas and plays is that the big opera houses in capital cities play in repertoire. A normal week will have opera A on Tuesday, opera B on Wednesday, a ballet on Thursday, opera A again on Friday, and opera B again on Saturday. The Metropolitan in New York has a Saturday matinee of one opera and an evening performance of another. Rehearsal for future performances happen in the mornings. The result for me is that I can't just place lights where I choose. These big opera houses work with fixed rigs. Here is a photograph of a typical lighting rig in a German opera house, in this case, Deutsche Oper Berlin. Another difference between plays and operas is the pattern of rehearsals for me. In opera, as for a play, I prepare a plan and the technicians build the set and I focus the lights and plot the states. But then, instead of the technical rehearsal, there will be a series of rehearsals with lights and set and piano in the mornings of week 1. So piano rehearsal A on this plan. Then a series of rehearsals with lights, set and costumes and orchestra and a pre-dress in week 2, always in the mornings. Then a dress rehearsal and the premiere in week 3. Note that there is always a day between any 2 performances of the same opera to give the singers' voices a rest. If you think, poor dears, try singing at the top of your voice for 3 hours. These big opera houses have large crews. Scottish Opera have 5 lighting technicians. I once had a conversation with the head of lighting at Munich Opera House. He complained he only had a lighting crew of 24 technicians and he really needed 30. So that's the first half of my talk. Those of you who are asleep should wake up now. I will show you some photographs from operas and plays that I have lit. One moment. Right. So this is The Flying Dutchman by Wagner on the lake in Bregenz in 1989. Set designer Stefan Lazaridis, director David Pountney. You can see that the performance is happening on the lake. And you get an idea of scale from the size of the doors in the lighthouse, which are normal sized doors. This photograph, I hasten to point out that none of these photographs have been doctored. This is the photograph from the wedding scene in Flying Dutchman, in which the Dutchman marries Senta. And this is the chorus of dead sailors, also from Flying Dutchman. And this, so far as I know, is the only example of a postage stamp based on an opera set. This is the Austrian 6-shilling stamp from 1995, which is a kind of composite of the Flying Dutchman set. Was published to celebrate 50 years of the Bregenz Festival. Okay, this one is Verdi's Nabucco. Once again, set designed by Stefan Lazaridis, once again directed by David Pountney. We did this in 1991. And once again, I point out that this photograph has not been doctored. This was taken during the dress rehearsal of Nabucco. Although there are arrangements in Bregenz that if it rains, you can go indoors and see a concert performance. But what you can't do is cancel your dress rehearsal. If it's raining during the dress rehearsal, you have to carry on, and we did. We carried on in a thunderstorm, and we were out on the seating, which you can see at the bottom of the picture down there. And I could feel the water level rising in my shoes during the performance. But it was unforgettable. This is Fidelio. Once again, set designed by Stefan Lazaridis, directed by David Pountney, on the lake in Bregenz. That big cloud cloth that you see there behind the houses, later on in the opera, that cloth is removed, and behind it are the prisoners in their cells. So they sing their, these are political prisoners, and they sing the prisoners' chorus from their cells. This is a fairly poor quality photograph because it's taken from a television broadcast of the opera. This one, I did not light this one. I was not the lighting designer of this. I'm only showing you this because this is one of the most striking examples of a set from Bregenz. It was directed by Richard Jones and designed by Tony MacDonald. And the opera is Verdi's Un ballo in maschera, a masked ball. Right, this one is Tosca by Puccini. This time the set design is by Johannes Laaker, and the director is Philip Himmelman. The reason that it features a giant eye is that Tosca, if you don't know the story of Tosca, Tosca is obsessed that Cavaradossi is a painter, her lover, and he's painting a Madonna in a church, and Tosca thinks that he's painting the eyes of another woman, and she's jealous. Now, the main interest in this, in Tosca, which I did light, by the way, is that Tosca features in A Quantum of Solace, the Bond film. About 20 minutes into the film, Bond goes to see an opera performance. And the opera performance that he goes to see is Tosca in Bregenz. And once again, this is a fairly poor quality image because it's a still from a film. But as a result of that, I got one of my claims to fame, which is I have my name on the credits of a Bond film. This one, this is a daylight shot of the set for Henri Chenier, which is an opera by Giordano, which is set in during the French Revolution. So this time the set designer is David Fielding, the director is Keith Warner. So this was in 2011. And I've got some examples here of the lighting of the show. So at one point in the opera, the head flips back and we have performers inside a kind of library in here. And you can also see on the book on his shoulder, we have a slide projection with black and white slides, and chorus on the staircase. And this is the performer up here is Peter Bronder, tenor. And at one point he climbs out of the eye and abseils down onto the platform down here, singing all the way. This one is Turandot by Puccini. In this case, the director, Franco Marelli, is also the set designer. So Franco Marelli designs his own sets, and under normal circumstances, he would also be his own lighting designer. But you couldn't do that in Bregenz because you'd have to be working from 10 o'clock in the morning one day until 5 o'clock the following morning and back in again at 10 o'clock. So you couldn't do that. So they asked me to do the lighting for it. And this is the front cover of the DVD version. So you can see a lot across the top here, there are stills, a large circular screen rises up out of the floor and gets video projections onto the screen. This is another shot from Turandot. If you know the opera, this is the scene in which the chorus sing about the forging of the swords. So this is a kind of forge in here. You can also see in the foreground here, I'll just go back. So you see the background here, these are a reproduction of the terracotta warriors from the Chinese Qin Memorial. And we carry on the theme of terracotta warriors down into the water down there. Right, now we go indoors in Bregenz. This is an opera called The Greek Passion by Martinu, which we did in 1999. Indoors. The indoor theatre in Bregenz is also very big, and as well as the outdoor concert versions of the outdoor show, they also do fully staged operas of go back. They do fully staged versions of less well-known operas, more obscure operas, but they only do 4 performances of them. This photograph is quite confusing, but it does enable you to see how complex the set design was. Once again, this is Stefan Lazaridis designing and David Pountney directing. This was in 1999. This one is a version of Hamlet by Franco Faccio. Franco Faccio was a contemporary of Verdi, and he was also a conductor of some of the premieres of Verdi's operas, particularly of Otello. But he wrote this version of Hamlet for himself, by himself, and I personally thought it was absolutely wonderful. This is fairly obviously the appearance of Hamlet Senior's ghost. This one is a version of Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice by a composer called Andrei Tchaikovsky. Andrei Tchaikovsky was, his name was not Tchaikovsky. He was Polish. I can't remember his Polish name, but in 1989, 1938. In 1938, he was living in Poland. He was Jewish, so his grandmother changed his name to protect him from the Nazis, and she just chose the name of her favorite composer. He escaped from Nazi-occupied Warsaw and moved to London, grew up to be a successful concert pianist and a very enthusiastic supporter of the Royal Shakespeare Company. So near the end of his life, he wrote this version, opera version of The Merchant of Venice, and died shortly afterwards. But in his will, he left his skull to the Royal Shakespeare Company to play the role of Yorick in Hamlet, and he does. So the photograph that you see of David Tennant holding Yorick's skull, that skull is the skull of Andrei Tchaikovsky, composer of The Merchant of Venice. The codicil in his will says that it must only be used by the Royal Shakespeare Company and only used for that purpose. As you can see, this is a, sorry, beg your pardon. The Merchant of Venice was directed by Keith Warner, and the set designer was Ashley Martin Davis. This is a scene from later on in the Merchant of Venice. And now we go to Nero or Nerone. This is another opera being performed indoors in Bregenz. This time it's by Arrigo Boito. This is another contemporary of Verdi. Boito is well known as the librettist of Otello and Falstaff, which are Verdi's two of Verdi's versions of Shakespeare plays. Arrigo Boito was also a composer. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I'll go back. Also composed this opera. It's musically, it's more like Wagner than Verdi, but the storyline, frankly, is not very successful, mainly because the last 20 minutes or so is devoted to somebody taking a very long time to die. So I'm not recommending it, but it did look beautiful. Right, so we'll move away from Bregenz now. How am I doing for time? Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. So this is Elisir d'Amore by Donizetti, which we did in Amsterdam in 2007. And the person you can see here on the right in this image is Bryn Terfel, who is singing the role of Dulcamara in Elisir de Mori, which he did as an Elvis impersonator. And he was absolutely brilliant, and the ladies' chorus just loved him. And this is another scene from later in Elisir. Once again, the set designer is Johannes Lajaker, and the director is Guy Joosten in this case. This one is Romeo and Juliet. This is the Gounod version of Romeo and Juliet for the Metropolitan in New York, which I lit in 2007. You can see from this photograph just how big the stage is at the Metropolitan in New York. This one is the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. The image you see in the middle at the back there is, whoop, sorry, I keep doing that, is one of the Hubble space photographs projected onto a back projection screen. One of the great things about the Hubble images is that they are free of copyright. So you can use whatever you like. Right, this is Handel's Julius Caesar. Handel wrote, this is not a version of the Shakespeare play. This opera is about the relationship between Handel, no, not between Handel, between Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. And we did this at the Sydney Opera House in 1994 with Yvonne Kenny as Cleopatra and Graham Pushy as Julius Caesar. The director was Francisco Negrin, and the set designer was Tony Baker. It was an absolutely delightful place to work, Sydney Opera House. I loved every minute of it. This is Verdi's Macbeth. Verdi wrote 3 versions of Shakespeare plays: Macbeth, Othello, and Falstaff, which Falstaff is a version of the Merry Wives of Windsor. This Macbeth was, I'll keep doing that, sorry. This Macbeth was directed by David McVicker and set designed by Tanya McCollin. This is the witches at the very beginning of Macbeth. Hubble, bubble, toil and trouble. It was very interesting working in St. Petersburg. The conductor was Gergiev, and everybody behaved as if he was some kind of tyrant. He wasn't, but everybody acted as if he was a tyrant. This is an opera version of Pinocchio by Jonathan Dove, which we originally did for Opera North. Oh, I didn't put the date on this one. It's about 10 years ago, about 2011, maybe 2012. So we originally did it in Leeds, but it was a co-production with Bonn and Minneapolis in the United States, and it also went to a children's theatre in Moscow. And this is the scene in which Geppetto and Pinocchio are in the belly of the big fish. It's not a whale, it's a big fish, an important distinction. Right, and this one is I Capuletti e Montecchi. So this is a different, by Bellini, a different version of Romeo and Juliet. which I did originally in Geneva in 1990, but it then went to Genoa and to Paris, Paris Opera at the Bastille. And just a few weeks ago, I did a television version of it for Paris. Set designer is Michael Levine, and the director here is Robert Carson. Right, okay, so that's it for operas. I'm moving on to plays now. This is a play by Brian Friel called Translations, which we did on Broadway in 2007. The actor in the middle there, standing, is Alan Cox, Brian Cox's son. Brian Cox, the actor's son. This is The Playboy of the Western World by John Millington Synge. Starting in 2005, I did with the Druid Theatre Company in Galway. I did the complete works of John Millington Synge, all in one day. And this is one of the plays. This is another, The Riders to the Sea, which we did in Galway, but then took it to Dublin, to Edinburgh, and to New York, to the Lincoln Festival in New York. And this is a play called, also by the Druid Theatre Company in Galway. I did a lot for them. A play called Sive by John B. Keane in 2002. I just like this photograph because of the composition. Looks like a painting. Getting near the end now. So these are a couple of things that I did early on in my career. So this is Mark Rylance, much younger Mark Rylance than you see now. This is him in 1989 playing Hamlet. He played Hamlet in his pajamas. This was for the RSC. And the other picture here is Max von Sydow in The Tempest. This was 1988, directed by Jonathan Miller and designed by Richard Hudson. And coming up to more recent times, I've started doing lighting plays for the Conservatoire in Glasgow. So this was a student production of Henry V, in which Henry V was played by a girl, and she was absolutely magnificent. I don't actually particularly want to see Henry V played by a man now. And the person to her right, to her left, our right, here is the signer. And in this production, the signers, there were 3 signers, BSL signers in the production, and they were signing and acting, so that if there are 2 characters talking to one another downstage, then upstage, there are 2 signers having the same conversation with one another in character. So I was very impressed by that. Finally, this is a play called The Hanging Gardens, which we did in the Abbey in 2000, at the Abbey in Dublin, play by Frank McGuinness, which we did in 2013. And I just particularly like this photograph. Right, okay, so I've reached the end of my talk. So I'll open up to questions.